All right. So, hello everyone, and welcome to the Frontlist Media Spotlight Show. And I will be hosting you tonight. My name is Ritika, and I will start by introducing all three of you a little bit. So, I will start by Arti, and Arti, you. I will just read it out from whatever information I've gathered on you. So, Arti Sonthalia here has written award winning children's books, and she has shared about her love for reading in a lot of TED Talks. She's the author of Big Bully and Emmy, Hungry to Read, Best Friends Forever, Hungry to Play, Read, Write, Race. That's just to count a few. And for her most recent book, Simi Stands Tall, she has done a terrific job in inspiring young readers to cultivate self belief and the courage to uphold what is right, leaving a lasting impact. And moving on to Akshay Manwani. Akshay Manwani here, he's a father to Naina and to Nuri, who's a loopy retriever. Akshay's first book, Sahir Ludhiani, The People's Poet, was critically acclaimed and has been a bestseller. He writes on Indian cinema and popular culture for a variety of publications such as The Caravan, The Indian Quarterly, Scroll.in, Mint, Business Standard, and Mumbai Mirror. And Akshay also appears on television as a National Basketball Association expert. That's fantastic. All right, moving on to Ritoparna Hazra. Ritoparna Hazra is the art director of Amar Chitra Katha, and she has been working there for the last 10 years. She's in charge of design and art and heads the design team at ACK. She has also illustrated several stories for the same, and she's constantly learning and has a keen and unique sense of design, and she makes sure to experiment with a lot of different mediums. With that, now that we all know each other a little bit, I would like to introduce you to today's topic in question, which is diving deep into children's literature. And since we have two authors and one illustrator in place, I'm sure this will go on very smoothly. With that, I will ask you my first question, and I'm sure a lot of different people want to know this from you. And the first question is, what inspired you to get involved in children's literature? So could you, any one of you, could you share the gateway that, sort of led you through this passion for being involved or being a part of children's literature? Arti, would you like to take it away?
So I think reading books was my gateway that ignited my passion, to write children's books. When I was a kid, I would read a lot of Enid Blyton books, and they just ignited the passion. And I had an amazing English literature teacher also, who just brought in the love for literature for me. And I think, but I just stop it all to reading books, you know. And
Yeah.
the way it just takes you to another world, and that make believe world, which seems so real and fantastic, that you just want to be a part of that. And that's how it started for me. Started writing my own diaries, and they had old stories, even when I was like in grade 5 and 6. So I think it just sparked then and there.
That's wonderful. I think for a lot of us, it starts with us getting involved in reading as
Yeah,
kids and how we grew up with books.
yeah.
Akshay, what do you have to say to that?
In my case, it was a little bit of humiliation at home, I would say, which got me to writing. We were I had already authored a couple of books prior to my children's writing foray. And I remember we were in Kaziranga National Park in 2018, and my daughter had, there was a moment where we had paused on a safari, and it was very, enjoyable experience for us. And suddenly, out of the blue, I don't know what was going on in my daughter's mind, who at that point in time, I think she was 8 years old. And she said that, why do you write these boring books about Hindi films and all, which are of no interest to me? Why don't you do something which is of interest to me? So it was that very, kind of hard-hitting criticism, very blunt criticism, which, let me think that, why don't I combine my passion for wildlife photography? I also do a lot of wildlife photography. I run my own wildlife tour company also. So I thought about it and I said, okay, let's go about setting this record straight. And I guess it was that maybe what I called criticism, but it was, I think I needed a little bit of a push and I got it from my daughter. And that's what led me to, write this book, which is The Tiger, the Bear, and the Battle for Mahovan. So yeah, that's what got me started.
Sounds wonderful. What about Ritoparna?
So, as a child, I have always been drawn to the visual narrative, which a children's book, provides, the images, the colors, it was magic to me. So I wouldn't read the words. I would look at the images. I would make up stories in my mind. And, that's had a very strong hold on me. And that's exactly what I wanted to do. I always used to paint in my free time as a child. I used to, whatever books were lying around, if there were thick covers, I would try to make them in my own style. So, that's exactly, I mean, as that age, I knew this is exactly what I wanted to do when I grew up. And yeah, luckily I am doing that. So it's great.
That's
Yeah.
wonderful that your passion turned into a career, and here we are. So, my next question to all of you is, how crafting stories, especially not just for adults, for kids, is especially a little bit harder because you have to keep kids engrossed in a book. You have to make sure that the kid is looking at the book and wants to read, wants to turn a page again and again. So how do you use creative elements, like both in writing as well as in illustration, to make sure you keep kids engrossed in that? Let's start with Akshay this time.
So I guess I have seen the cover of Arti's book, and I mean, of course, we've all grown up reading Amar Chitra Katha, and I must tell Rituparna that I think she has probably the coolest gig in the world, because it's the gig that you have is just so unbelievable that it almost feels that I'm talking to someone who exists in the realm of magic, fantasy, etc. So more power to you. So the point that I was trying to make was that, I guess in both your areas of writing, working, etc., there is more visual imagery and the text is not that much. This is just my very, kind of layman's point of view. Whereas my book it was a like a novel length effort, 200, 250 pages with, let's say, 2 images per chapter. That's the structure of my book. So I thought, when I started only, I realized that, maybe there was an additional challenge that I was dealing with, that I'm, in especially in today's age where, everything is so visual, whether in terms of children consuming on tablets and all kinds of digital devices, phones, etc., that I was still, relying heavily on text. So, I mean, which is why I was very clear that I wanted images with it, even though it was just 2 images and they were black and white images. That's not what I originally wanted. I wanted colored images. But having said that, the one thing that I did from the very beginning, and I was very clear about it, is that I made my characters, or well, not all of them, but a few of my characters were quirky. So my story is set in a fictional jungle in India, which is called Mahovan, and there are all kinds of animal species that are present in the story, right? And that was the idea behind the book, that not only should it tell a story, but it should also give children an idea about the animal species which are found in India.
Mm-hmm.
So what I did was, apart from the main, I mean, it's like a regular story. There is a hero and there is a villain and there is good and bad, and it has a start, a middle, and an end. But besides these main characters, the supporting characters and all, I gave them certain quirks. Like, for example, there is a character in my story, which is, I mean, it's a Hollock gibbon. If you're familiar with that species, it's found in the northeastern part of the country. And one of the quirks that I embellished his character with was that he speaks very, 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 very slowly, right? In fact, in schooling sessions that I have done to, kind of promote the book or talk about the book, we've had a little bit of a game where, I ask children to come up and speak like how the character speaks in the book. Like, we ask them to read out some of the characters' dialogues in the book. And the the prize that we give out in this case is not to the person who's the fastest, which is generally the norm in any race, but who is the slowest, who can say it slower than the other person, right? But equally, there is a situation in the book that this character is found in a kind of a in a confrontational scene where he's supposed to battle the enemy, and in that moment, contrary to his personality, to the way he speaks, he is the most deadliest, the quickest fighter, right? These kind of quirks were there. There are two wild asses in the story who are just continuously kind of cracking jokes at each other's expense and all that. So I thought maybe having these kind of characters in the story will just hold on. I mean, apart from the inherent nature of the story itself, which is that there is a hero and there is a villain, I thought it was important to embellish the story with these characters and jokes and all that. So that was what I did.
That's wonderful to know, Akshay. Thank you so much. What about Arti?
For me, it's always the story first.
Mm-hmm.
If the story is in place, I know I have the reader with me.
Mm-hmm.
And with the story, when I'm working on the story, I need a lot of backstory of each character. A lot of backstory. And that's the real work for an author, to have the backstory of each character, because that's how you know your character well. So if you don't do this backstorying, you're going to get stuck. You have to know even like what the character likes to eat. Maybe you're not using that element anywhere in the book. You have to know what music he likes, what he keeps in his back pocket, what he keeps in his front pocket, how does he comb his hair. So I'm not using these elements maybe in the book at all, but I have to know it so that the character starts speaking to me. And yeah, then automatically each character is doing their job while I'm writing. So if the story and the backstory are in place for me, I think that's wonderful. It just works. I liked what Akshay said about the quirkiness of the characters, having one slow but then a fierce fighter at the same time. Yes, that all these elements really add up to your story.
Right. I think this is a very interesting aspect that Arti has brought up. I remember once having this conversation with another one of the authors, and even the worst of the characters in the story, she seems so attached to, because, of
Yes.
course, in her mind, it must have an entire story. It must have,
Yes.
an entire lifetime of how the villain, let's say, came to be the
Yeah.
villain, right?
Yeah.
So this is a very interesting aspect that you brought up. With that, let's move on to Ritoparna. Ritoparna, what about you? How do you make sure that children are kept engrossed?
So a couple of things. I'll talk about the design aspect. So like Akshay said, like adding characterized, personality traits to characters, right? So something like that we bring in by using it in the art. So when you're talking about really young readers, under the age of 8, where you have picture books or, like an ACK Junior and all, so what we do is we use the brightest colors, obviously, because the brighter the better, because children are now learning the colors.
Yeah.
And then minimal shading, because as primary as it is better as solid it gets. Then obviously expressions that builds up the
Mhm.
characters, right? How animated. So without reading the words, there should be a visual narrative that draws the child,
Right.
that a child who doesn't know how to read can sort of spend time and also create the stories in their head. And and the text that we use is very simple. We use the British English, and the fonts are very simple. And also some things like we use a lot of basic shapes, while building characters, especially for the younger ones, like the toddlers and all. So what we do is, like, say for example, if you take a triangle and make it into a mouse, right? So it's a designer's job to make sure that the a child relates that, oh, this triangle is a mouse. That's where the challenge comes in. Also, talking about something like this, we are making something called the baby comic, which is the name is temporary, but it's going to be something like the first ever comic a child reads. It's basically for toddlers. So what we are doing in that is that we are making only 3 or 4 or at the max, like that's the maximum number of parents that we would have in the thing. Very little text, and the characters are all basic shapes. So and the colors are bright, and the expressions are really loud. So it's like when a mother reads to the child can also follow through. So it's something that we are looking forward to. Sort of we will release it soon, and we have an artist who's making this is Sanjia, and she has a very unique knack of making these animated expressions. She's really good at it. So, and what else we do is, in terms of design, like panel borders. So when you are talking about biographies, we keep the panel borders as straight as possible, or as, because you are able to fit in as much content text wise.
Yeah.
So but whereas in when you go down, towards the toddler age group, then it's like how how you make it, like the panel borders are like hand drawn, roughly the bubbles are hand drawn, the fonts are easy to read, so the child then gets that aspect of playfulness, fun,
Yeah.
that really they can take home with them. And when the mother is not reading it, mother or father is not reading it, they can still sort of look at the images, and the story runs in their heads. So yeah,
Right.
I feel like that really helps.
That's great. So, since we've talked about, the playfulness and the entertainment that children's book sort of bring with it, I think at the back of the mind for every author, for a book, let's say there's this one purpose of education, especially for when it comes to children. What is the child learning from the book? What is the child taking away from the book? And something that the child may be, able to apply in real life in something which will make that child a better person or make the child have a better life. So how do you incorporate educational aspects of it within the book or within the illustrations, within your writing? How do you make sure that the child is learning something out of the book? Let's start with Ritoparna.
Okay, so see, I'll talk about ACK. So ACK is a brand that has been, known for retelling of stories. And sort of our USP is that how accurate our research is. So people use it for as a bible to like do their research while making movies. So or anything like children, the libraries pick up, the schools pick up. So the thing that Uncle Pai's vision was also, like that any child of any age can sort of pick up an Amar Chitrakatha and get an insight to the Indian heritage or culture.
Right.
So, and that is very easily possible with the medium that we work on, that is the comic books. So, if you give like a Vedas to a child, the text is so heavy, they can't grasp it. But if you give an ACK comic, anybody above the age of 8 can really pick it up, and like they know the characters, they take it home with them. They remember it, they internalize it, they know the small details. I am amazed by the number of fans ACK has about like just remembering collecting books. So I think ACK has done a decent job on like uh, this area where like where it comes to values and stuff. And now recently we are doing more work over like younger age group, like in ACK Julia. So what we are doing in there is that we are making picture books. So what we are doing over there is that we have like animal stories for mythology, like Ganesh and Kubera, Hanuman and the sun, right? So things like that. And because that really works, because the children are learning about animals, they're learning about these things, and they can really relate to. So there was a story that I illustrated. It was called Moose Saves Her Tail. And so what the story was about is basically, it really indirectly tells you how to survive in a society. It's basically the I'll give you a brief of the story. So it's basically like there's the protagonist who's the mouse who lives in the jungle, and there are all these animals. Like there's a cat who chases everybody, and there there is a mongoose, and there is a owl, and everybody is like really frustrated because of how the cat keeps chasing everybody. So then one day the hunter comes and catches the cat. And what, then everybody rejoices. Suddenly what happens is everybody is then on to the mouse. So then the mouse realizes what has happened. It was probably better when the cat was chasing everybody away. So, she realizes that, she releases the cat. And then the last scene is so sort like, sort of like she's sleeping peacefully in her bed and everybody is sort of fighting. So that shows like that the ecosystem is sort of, restored, the balance is restored, and, how to survive. So it's such a complicated concept, and, how it is sort of given in such an easy medium. And I think that's probably the things, when we do things like we talk about Kumaoni language. We did an ACK junior on the of a story from Kumaoni, so people then learn about the language, or at least a little bit about it, because every at the end of the book we have these things that they tell you a little bit more about it as well. So we try to make it that way. So yeah, so the knowledge is imparted.
That's great, Rituparna. And speaking of animals, let's ask the same question from Akshay.
Okay, this is a copy of my book, and basically to answer your question and to take off from where Rituparna just ended, that when I started work on the book, I was very clear that the book should have a 1+1 kind of effect on the child, or any reader for that matter. And that by 1+1 I mean is that the basic concept is that I'm telling a story. Like I've said, that hopefully it's engaging, it has a moral science lesson for the child, for whoever it is that is reading it. It's interesting enough by itself, right? +1 that I spoke of is basically that the child should learn something about India's incredible biodiversity, right? So now there are 3-4 aspects to this. So at the basic level itself, the blurb for my book, or the book synopsis in itself, there is a small synopsis at the book. And it mentions very clearly that The Tiger, the Bear, and the Battle for Mahoban is a story about self-belief and facing up to insurmountable odds. Set in the animal kingdom, it is also as much a primer to India's incredible wildlife diversity as it is a riveting tale about the choices we make and the true meaning of justice. So at the primary level itself, one of the hopefully takeaways from the story is that it kind of tells the child about the difference between revenge and justice. Because here is a character, the villain, that he's looking for revenge, but the hero is looking to do justice, and there is a difference in both if you look at it very closely. So that is one level of education that I was hoping to give the children. And at the next level, I was very clear. See, one of the stories that we've all grown up with, irrespective of age, demographic, gender, etc., in our nation, is that we've all somewhere in some form, either through seeing the movie or reading the book, we've all heard of the Jungle Book, right? Now, it's a great work of art, and really, I am in no position to critique it or offer criticism to what is a wonderful piece of work. But one of my kind of problems with the Jungle Book was that I thought that it was not truly representative of what is found in India, or it distorted the animals to a certain extent to almost make them caricaturish, right? For example, the King Louis character in the Jungle Book, right? It is not found in India, right? And you don't really have an ape which is that big and significantly larger than the other apes in the story, right? So I was very clear that I wanted to my characters to be placed within the Indian animal kingdom, right? There are no giraffes and zebras in my story, and that's simply because giraffes and zebras are not found in India, right? And at the same time, I introduced these characters which I've already mentioned before: the Holok Gibbon, the wild ass. Rituparna just now made a beautiful point about the Kumaoni language. So I wanted the children to know specifics. See, we are growing up in a world today where, or at least, I don't know today, but 30 years ago, I was born and raised in Delhi, right? Where everyone from south of Maharashtra is referred to as a South Indian. Everyone from to the right of West Bengal is referred to as a Northeastern, right? So just like we need to appreciate the individual cultures and the individual ethnicities of people from these parts of the country, and similarly from the western part of the country and the southern part of the country, and know the difference between someone coming from Karnataka and Tamil Nadu. Similarly, the same is applicable for wildlife also, right? There is a difference between the great Indian hornbill and the Narcondam hornbill. Sorry to get a little technical, but so when we were, when we were talking about when these characters are there in the book, at the end of the book, what we did is, as Rituparna said about ACK, is that we have a little bit of a glossary at the end of the books, a 6-page glossary, which gives you a little bit of a general knowledge write up on each character, which is about where this particular species is found in India, what is the exact name by which it is known, etc. And then the next level of education was that I was very clear, and in fact, this is no criticism of anyone over here or in this panel, and do not take me otherwise, but a lot of children's artwork that is done in the Indian publishing space and worldwide, and it may be a manner of engaging with the child, right? That animals are often caricatured when they are being presented to children of a certain age. But I was very clear to my brief to my illustrator was very clear. I wanted the children to see the animal as it is found in the wild. I did not want any extra exaggeration of the animal, because I wanted the children to be able to identify with that species when they go out and see it in the wild. Right? And why is this important? This is important because if you don't know your animal species, you'll never ever be, there won't be a spark within you which will say that, this is important. I read about the greater adjutant stork and I want to save it. Stork is a very broad umbrella term. There are 6 or 7 varieties of storks which are found in India. Right? One variety of stork may not be found in your part of the country, but another variety of stork will be found in your part of the country. Right? This level of education was happening at various points. It was one, like I said, at the morals level of the story, then through the images in the story, and then finally we gave a glossary at the end so that children know that, for example, the langur which is there in the story is different from the Himalayan langur. Right? These are 2 different kinds of langurs. I mean, we're all Indians at the end of the day, but someone from Punjab has a different cultural ethnicity than someone who comes from Kashmir, right? They may both be Indians and North Indians, but it is important to recognize those differentiations, because, it's all about, as we beautifully say it, it's all about unity in diversity, right? So
Right.
I hope that answers your question.
That's very well said, Akshay. Now let's take the question to Arti.
Of course, books means a little educative. And of course, there should be pleasure in reading as well with education. Otherwise, it's boring. It's going to become a subject book. So it's the job of the author to weave in pleasure and education together. And I feel the kind of books that I write, like my first book is Big Bully and Mamami, it's dealing with a situation where the child is stammering and he's being bullied because of his stammer. So when I grew up, I always noticed that the books that I loved to read, they were basically either mystery, they were adventure, and that's it, climbing up a tree, having fun there on a tree house, coming down. That was what we had. We didn't have anything to deal with. How do you deal with if I'm stammering? If I'm the stammerer, how do I deal with if I have dyslexia, like my book, Read, Write, Raise? How do I deal with when my friends, the popular girls group in my school, is bullying me? How do I deal with that? That it was a complete vacuum. There were no such books, and especially for the age group I write for, like 8 to 11, that group 8 to 12. That's a time when you're actually forming yourself from within, just about to touch teenager, and you can just forming things inside your head. How much ever as a parent, you may try to be with your kid, talk to the kid. Yes, we all are conscious parents, but there is a lot of things that they're going to learn on their own through media as well as through books. So I feel these are things, certain things. You may be your best friend to your child, but maybe he or she's not telling you that she's getting bullied,
Right.
or she's getting attracted to people who she shouldn't be. They're not the right kind of people. So to make those choices, I feel it's very important, especially in our culture, in Indian culture, where we anyways have a vacuum of children's books. So it's very important to add these elements, which are extremely educated, and they go with you for lifelong, I feel.
Right.
Yeah. So I think these are elements which I love writing about, which are not spoken, and still there's a curiosity to know about.
Right. I think a big part of, like modern children's literature or literature in general
Hmm.
is the question of inclusivity, not just
Yeah,
with
absolutely.
children, not just with adults, but also with animals. For
Yeah.
example, I think a lot of us, we grew up with this one poem, which was दौड़ा दौड़ा दुम दबा के दौड़ा
Uh,
and घोड़े की पूंछ पे मारा हथौड़ा. And very recently, I was actually trying to reiterate the same poem with my nephew, who is just 3 years old at this point. And then I suddenly thought, why are we hitting the ghoda with the hathoda?
oh,
And it was such a imaginative process, and it was like, okay, this poem is out. Like, we are not saying that poem again. So I think I would like to have a conversation about this concept. Like, my question is for Arti, actually. So your book, let's say, Simi Stands Tall, and it focuses on concepts like building genuine friendships, and it questions bullying as a concept, it questions peer pressure as a concept. So, how exactly do you aim, or how exactly does it happen to make a difference in a child's psyche, let's say? How do you approach the topic in a way that it is easily graspable by a child?
yeah. The first thing I make sure it's not preachy. It
Yeah.
just cannot be preachy, and it cannot be educative, like in that sense, like a subject book. It has to be fun, as mentioned earlier. So these, again, like I spoke, that these are sensitive topics, and you'll not really come up to your parent, but today children are coming up, because parents have become conscious about, getting to know what's going on in their child's head, and so that the child is not depressed, and so I think such topics need to be spoken about
Yeah.
aloud as a parent, with your children. We all have kids, and I think through books while you're reading it to your child, I also feel that there should be a lot of reading done between a parent and a child together. So if you know the concept of bullying, the concept of peer pressure, which we even face now as adults, in office or anywhere, someone's getting bullied at home and things like that. So if we explain these concepts to the child well, and then there are books available in the market which deals with such issues, I think our children are just gonna be great. They're going in
Yeah.
the right path, I feel, and that is what I like writing about such topics.
Mhm.
And yeah, and I have to mention about Rituparna, about ACK, and how much ACK is really trying by retelling the same stories in a good way, in a child-friendly way, which also adds up so much, for a child. It's so important to know our culture, and as again Akshay also mentioned, I love the whole thing that the stock is different, you know,
Right.
in different parts, and it's lovely that everyone is doing in their way to educate this group of kids. It's just fantastic. It's just absolutely
Right.
fantastic. That's it from my
All right. So when we come to Ritoparna, you work with illustration and design, which also happens to be a big part of, let's say, digital media, with something with which children are hugely fascinated by. So how do you make sure that you are sort of weighing away or sort of differentiating from that digital aspect, so that children are drawn more to these books than the, let's say, a TV or a cartoon?
See, so obviously, like earlier we used to do biographies, and even now we do biographies, folk tales. We do, history, mythology, and also economics. ACK Junior, which is a relatively newer launch. But what I feel like having a diversity in sort of catering to different age groups, like how Akshay said that some illustrations are caricature because that works for toddlers. So when you grow up, the accuracy to, like, say if you read like a biography, the character has to look like the character. So say a person goes and watches a movie, talking about the thing. You'll see a movie and you'll be like, okay, I need to know a little bit more about this person. So they will go back and read our ACK, or because our content is so relatable, not relatable, sorry, it's researched. And we our editors put in so much effort in getting it as accurate as possible. It is also like picked up by directors like Raja and all, they refer to our books for cinematography, for costumes, for things like that. We also had a tie-up with Tanaji when the movie was coming out. So having, obviously we have to get with the times. We cannot. There was the cave age, and now, so obviously things are going to change. People are going to get new technologies. We have to get with the time, and also the thing is that we have to keep it going, meaning the visual narrative will keep going, the stories will keep going, the retelling of stories will keep going, imagination will keep sort of uh, people, children have to get with the thing. So having said all of that, we do also have a very strong, uh, you know, uh, social media presence. So when a child reads about a certain thing on social media, they want a certain book, or the parents want a certain book. So not to take it and look at it as a evil thing, but also how we can utilize it and sort of make it work to sort of make children want to buy these books. And also, like I earlier spoke about, these things which Akshay spoke about. So this is our ACK Junior. So this is our like a level one, and then there's level two, which is slightly more, for slightly older children. Then there's this level three. This is about the Kumavni language. So you can see the difference in even in the picture book scenario, we have these levels. So also after all of this, there are these say uh, extra pages, right? Which I feel really helps. If you see, like count the stones, or like, so there are games which we made later on, and information about animals. So, how much can you give information
Right.
in the, most this thing kind of way, remodeling the books, making them fresher
Right.
and newer. And, so these things are there. And also, having said that, a, a book will always have its USP that, you can hold it, you can
Hmm.
collect it, you can keep it with you forever. It's a treasure. But
Right.
again, like, if a child is reading on the digital platform, on an iPad, the parent travels a lot, the child is getting to read. So
Yeah.
I feel like you have to figure out a way, as this is our job, as artists and writers, to figure
Hmm.
out a way how we deliver the message, and the child keeps learning, you
Right.
know. So yeah.
I think, yeah, like books definitely have that one interactive aspect to it in terms of games, in terms of uh, just touching a book, in terms of holding a book
Yes.
that keeps a child so engrossed, and that might give it even an upper hand than, let's say, mainstream media or mainstream digital books and different things like that. So with that, I would like to actually come to Akshay. Akshay, we were just talking about the use of animals and the use of inclusivity in animals and for animals. So I would like to ask you, how is it that you are also introducing that part of it, that aspect, or that sensitivity towards animals in your books?
So, well, this is a difficult question, to be very honest with you. See, I'll be very honest. See, my story, like I told you, it's set in the Indian animal kingdom,
Hmm.
and it is a story of, like I said, revenge and justice. There is
Right.
without giving too much away, there is bloodshed involved. In fact, I had an experience where one of the illustrators that we went to as a publisher and an author, where she said that my moral stance on the subject doesn't allow me to do the illustrations for this book, because I see myself as a conservationist and I cannot participate, and I respected her opinion on that. But the again, sometimes you have to tell your story through these kind of mediums, and by medium in this case I meant telling a story which is actually applicable to human beings through animals, because that's how children identify with it better, perhaps, right? And this is not to say that it's a very violent tale. It is certainly, I mean, my daughter was reading Harry Potter at the age of 7 and 8, right? And one thing I learned after I did this book, and I think we ought to give children credit for a lot more than what we give them. They're very intelligent. They're like sponges. You expose them to something and they will absorb it. They will absorb it and more. Like both my co-panelists have said, Rituparna or Arti, that it is basically they will then seek out. They want to know more. You have only helped them scratch the surface. Then they will go about and for example, in Arti's case, they must have surely said, okay, so this is how I deal with bullying, but perhaps can I do this also? Or, can I react to the situation differently, right? I'm sure the Amar Chitra Katha audience is also like that. They look forward to more such books and more further stimulus. So coming back to the point of inclusivity, what happened organically in my book is when I started writing the book, I just had one, kind of, to give you a little bit of a background, is that I'm a Hindi cinema junkie, right? Especially 70s Hindi cinema junkie. I grew up on that. It has kind of, distorted a lot of my life notions, because 1970 Hindi's cinema is essentially campy, right? So I had a basic structural idea in my head. There was a scene in my head where it was basically that there is a tigress and there are her 3 cubs, and they are being forced to separate, right? On this one dark stormy night, which if you all have seen, and I'm sure at least some of you would have seen Amar Akbar Anthony, which is basically 3 children getting separated from their father, right? And it is raining. Of course, it's not a night, but I think it's daytime when that movie begins. So in my head, that was the kind of main idea that I started my story with, right? Or rather, that's where the story kind of emerged from. Now, you would say that how is this kind of have anything to do with inclusivity? So the truthful answer is, when I had this idea, I did not know who my hero is and who my villain is, right? I just had this core idea as my story. But as I started writing it, what eventually happened in my story is that the tigress, the mother, eventually becomes the hero of the story. She is a more sensitive, sensible, and powerful figure compared to her mate, right? Who is shown to be somewhat of a, well, I won't say simpleton, but he is, he turns out to be naive, right? And she continuously warns him along all the mistakes that he makes. She warns him about them each time he's making them, but he doesn't listen to her, right? And then there is this whole there is a coup that takes place in the jungle, and he's sent into prison. This tigress and her cubs are exiled, and how she comes back into, and I thought that I wrote the story and it got published and I was very happy. But a lot of children, not only the girls, the boys also came back and they said, we couldn't imagine that that she would be, because her character comes along only in the 4th chapter of the book. The first chapter begins with the kind of the original ruler of the jungle, who's old and who's looking to give way or pass on the throne to his son. And then the son is introduced. So when the father is there, they all think that the father will have one last hurrah before to resolve this story. But then when they read about the son, they think that the son is going to be. So, it was essentially about a little bit of women empowerment, just by virtue of bringing in different characters from the animal kingdom. I thought it was inclusive because, like I said, when we are toddlers, when we are children, what do we learn? We learn L for lion, E for elephant, T for tiger, R for rhino. That's it, right? But we don't talk about H for Hollock gibbon. We do not talk about G for Great Indian Hornbill. We do not learn about the other, like, there is a character of the peregrine falcon, which is the world's fastest bird in the world, right? And it is found in India. So P for peregrine falcon. So my inclusivity was of a certain different kind within the broad world of the animal kingdom. I made it a point to talk about this so that when children go out, they know that this is a peregrine falcon. Hopefully, they will be telling their parents that this is not just an eagle. This is a kind of a falcon, which is a different subset of raptors, and within that, it is a peregrine falcon.
Right. All right, thank you so much, Akshay. So now we come to my very last question for all of you. And the question is that, of course, from our early days, from since when I was a child, and now that I look at children's books, I've seen a lot of evolution. I've seen a lot of change. The books that we read as kids, they were very, very different in terms of both illustrations, in terms of how they were written, in terms of the story they were trying to tell us, and the books that I read nowadays, it's quite different. So my question to you is, let's say in the next 10 or 20 years, how do you envision children's stories and children's books being transformed, or how would you like to transform the books? Let's start with Arti on this one.
So transformation has to happen because you have to move on with the times.
Yeah.
So I think how do I do my research and things like that? I love meeting children, and especially the age group I like writing on. So I just like to be with them, observe them, and then you just know that this is how they talk. This is the language that they are using today. So you have, and there are certain things that will always be there, like morals. Like, ACK is retelling, just telling stories 500 years back, 1,000 years back, and it's still just doing great, So moral values, like peer pressure is always going to be there. Finding a good friend is always going to be there. But just using today's, attributes, today's things, like maybe the word iPad, just like, because it's in, maybe the word AI, artificial intelligence, that it's of this era.
Right.
It's like that. So this transformation, I think each author, it just comes automatically to them. And like when we were growing up, like when I was in college, I was seeing a dying thing about books. That was a time when the e-reader had come up, and so much of media, and still it is there. But again, I feel there is a big bounce back for books, for visual books and picture books, which I love. So I'm not a picture book author, but I just love picture books, and so I think picture books will hardly be any. We didn't have anything to do with picture books in Indian, culture, in this literature world of the Indian society. But the way it is bounced is beautiful, and I think there's no looking back. This transformation that has happened in children's literature is fantastic, and it should just keep going on and on. And there should be a lot of encouragement for more libraries. I feel I'm always looking for libraries which I never find. It's really a big desire. Sometimes when you go to the mall and there's everything, there's a play zone for kids, there's shopping for kids, there's McDonald's, there's XYZ, whatever. But there is no library. I wish someone would bring up a library in a mall.
Yeah.
That one can just like you can just go there, tuck with it. So it should. I always feel reading has to be pleasurable and fun, and then it stays with you for lifelong. If it's a pressure, if it's made, this is reading time, this is this time. No, already we are making them have green vegetables and this vegetable and that. Sath mein reading bhi dal do to there's no fun.
Right.
I think reading has to be fun. So this transformation is happening. And I'm sure it will happen more. Like,
Hmm.
just cross my fingers. And by the time I'm 70, 80, and I hope I'm writing loads and loads with the transformative books.
That's actually a wonderful point, Arti, that you brought up. I remember when I was a little kid, there used to be this thing in Delhi, and it was called a library on a bus and library on wheels. So there used to be this bus which used to roam around Delhi, and it used to have books and seats in the bus. And every day, I remember me and my grandfather, we used to go and sit in the bus and read a book, right? And then when the technology came in, and now my interest was more, oh, I want this Kindle that I want to take everywhere instead of having this book. But I think that you're absolutely right that in saying that there has been a bounce back.
Yeah,
Now more and more people and even kids are realizing
yeah,
that just holding a book is a
yeah.
completely different experience than holding a Kindle, right? So that is completely true with the transformation. So thank you so much for bringing that up. And now moving on to Rituparna. Rituparna, what are your thoughts about this?
I will like to I would like to talk about the evolution of sort of how comics were made in ACK. So initially, when this Uncle Pai brought up this concept of making comics for using the retelling, or using it for retelling of our stories, our epics, and our histories and all. So initially, the art was like hand drawn. There was a proper letterist who would write on a piece of paper, and if there was a correction, they would have to put cut and paste and put paper on top of it. So it was
Mhm.
that intricate. And the colorist would, like, out of a palette, a certain number of palette, I think around 26, they would like write the number of the color what will go. Just talking about that, and to now, when even like when I was in college, I think Adobe had just come in. You
Hmm.
see, I think I was in the time when I sort of did my college. It was like, people were learning Corel Draw, and then there was Adobe, right? And there was Illustrator, InDesign. And now to just think from that perspective, like to just think 10 years or 15 years down the lane, it's just a massive shift, and now you have Procreate, you see, and you can do so much in just talking about the thing. But at the end of the day, you are telling stories, you're making art. The concept remains the same. The format changes. the
Yeah.
format changes it gets with the time. Now you have audiobooks, now you
Mhm.
have GIF books. And I feel like what I really like, and I hope that we make more, and even I hopefully ACK makes more, is touch and feel books, and
Yeah.
elements like that, and like pop-up books, you know uh, uh, because you have to make the format interesting. Then something that ACK is working, ACK and Tinkle, I think Tinkle is also working on something called the wordless book. So there's
Hmm.
no text in the book, so they add it after Tinkle, after the comic is over. They add 2 pages of it, where the artist has complete liberty to sort of,
Hmm.
once they get the concept from the writer, the artist, Vineet, he makes his own art, and sort of like he drives the narrative, and that's brilliant. And I feel like doing these things where we just have to find new ways and techniques to just keep engaging the children. They are they have a short time span of attention. So I
Right.
feel like the more we keep giving them, and at the end of the day, they should learn something out of it. And also, more than anything, I as a child did not have much access to books, like you and
Hmm.
Arti spoke about. My parents were very, like, studies, and that's why I sort of used to paint a lot.
Hmm.
So that was something that I used to do for my pastime. So yeah, so then like having access to books, like even if they just buy books, new books, parents need to just do that,
Right.
whether it's on the digital media. If you can't, if you move a lot, we have an ACK digital app,
Hmm.
where the readership is great, like people read books, like, like
Hmm.
constantly on the app. But so as long as things are read, stories are told, I think it will keep changing. The
Right.
format will change. The concept, like from the caveman era till now, we are telling stories. But
Hmm.
it's just that the ways have changed. So
Yeah,
yeah.
that's wonderfully said, Rituparna. What about you, Akshay? What do you have to add to that?
Well, not much. I think my thoughts are much like Rituparna. I was going to say the same thing,
Hmm.
that, basically the format of delivery is changing since the beginning of mankind.
Hmm.
The underlying theme of somebody writing a story, or wanting to tell a story, has always been there. Then
Right.
how he manages to deliver it to his or her audience
Hmm.
is, depending on the times that they live in. Earlier, it used to be caveman paintings, and then they started, there was also a time where it was all oral tradition, and you had
Yes.
people, what is known as dastan goi, or some other, in some other part of the world it was known as something else. India has had a very rich oral tradition. That's how all our epics have been delivered to people, because in a country which didn't have very high literacy rates, it was the oral tradition that people relied on, right? But
Right.
somebody must have fundamentally written that story somewhere for it to be recited, for it to be learned, for it to be memorized, and then delivered to the public at large, right? And then once the printing press was invented, people started writing it down. As more graphic artists came in, graphic art came in, the manner in which the story was told through pictures, through color, etc. Today you have digital mediums. I still enjoy reading it on books, but my holding a physical copy in my hand. But my wife has, who also loved holding a book in her hand today, is a, what do you call, a tablet convert. My child still reads it through by holding physical books. She might change, but the need for someone to tell a story fundamentally will always be there. How he decides to tell his story, there are graphic artists who are telling their story through graphic art. I was recently gifted a book on my birthday very recently, which was apparently a story on the Israel-Palestine conflict. It's called Palestine. It's apparently by a very famous author. I don't remember the author's name, but my daughter, who's now 13 and a half, was so drawn in by the manner in which the art is done. It's a graphic novel, that she immediately said that, can I first read it and then I will give it to you, right? So here was a book which is supposedly dealing with, a very serious topic, which is the Israel Palestine conflict, but the artwork was so impressive that she immediately pulled it from me and she said, no, I want to read this first, right?
Hmm.
So this will be a constant evolution. There will be newer
Right.
ways coming in. We're already hearing of audiobooks. There might be a situation where, the writer himself is, being hologrammed as an entire living entity, and telling the story as he writes it. I don't know, I'm just talking out aloud. But
Possible.
fundamentally there will always be storytellers, and hopefully on that, maybe wishful note, I hope we don't become dinosaurs. I don't think we will ever become dinosaurs, because human beings inherently also like stories, right?
That
Good
is true.
versus evil, emotions. These are things which will never go out of fashion. I mean, I had once, long back, I mean, almost about 10 years ago, I had done a very detailed article for the Caravan. It was on, the television series, the Mahabharat, which used to be
Hmm.
shown on Indian television in the late 80s, early 90s. And one of the actors in that show, I had interviewed him, the character who played Karn in the Mahabharat, and he had a beautiful quote to give me, which found its way in the piece. He said, one of the reasons that the show did well is that it deals with all 36 emotions that are known to mankind. And I asked him, is this true that there are actually 36 emotions? He said, no, I just made that up. But basically, the entire gamut of emotions is covered in the Mahabharata. There's betrayal, there's
Hmm.
love, there is trust, there is brotherhood, there is infidelity, there is revenge, there is justice. Everything happens in that story, right? So basically, as long as these emotions remain, as long as human beings remain, these emotions will be there. And as long as these emotions are there, storytellers will always find something to write about, something to exploit within that rainbow of emotions. The medium of deliveries will keep changing.
Right. So thank you so much, Akshay, for that answer. And with that, we do come to an end of this session. Thank you so much for joining me, Akshay, Arti, and Ritoparna. It was definitely a stimulating conversation, at least for me. I hope it was for you as well.
Thank you.
And with that, I would like to wish you all a very good day ahead. Thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
joining me.